The grand obsidian hall of the Zaltora Ascendancy did not merely house the government. It was designed to crush the spirit of any who entered with the sheer weight of its history. The ceiling was lost in shadows, a vaulted expanse of dark stone that seemed to drink the light of the hovering luminary globes, creating an atmosphere of perpetual twilight, a deliberate choice to emphasize the gravity of the decisions made within. Here the air was always cool, smelling faintly of ozone and crushed violets, the scent of the highborn caste, and the silence was a physical weight, broken only by the rhythmic, echoing footsteps of the High Exarch Valoris. He walked with the heavy, purposeful stride of a conqueror, his carapace polished to a gleaming onyx sheen, the ceremonial cape of woven starlight trailing behind him like a liquid nebula. He was the apex of his species, a warrior philosopher who had overseen the annexation of a dozen star systems, bringing the light of the ascendancy to the ignorant dark. Yet, as he ascended the dais to the central podium, his four eyes narrowed, focusing not on the holographic star charts that dominated the room, but on the small, trembling figure of Archivist Thrum, who stood clutching a data slate as if it were a shield against execution. The tension in the chamber was palpable, a vibrating string pulled to its breaking point, resonating through the sensitive sensory tendrils of the gathered admirals, diplomats, and trade princes. They watched, breathless, as the clash between ancient superstition and imperial ambition prepared to unfold. Valoris reached the podium and placed his heavy, three-fingered hands upon the controls, causing the holographic display to flare with the vibrant azure of the Ascendancy's territory. It was a magnificent map, a sprawling web of trade routes and fortress worlds, but Valoris cared only for the jagged edge of the frontier, the region known colloquially as the Silent Sector. He let the silence stretch, asserting his dominance before his deep, resonant voice filled the chamber, amplified by the acoustics of the hall. "We stand at the precipice of a new era," Valoris began, his tone dripping with the certainty of a fanatic. "For 3,000 cycles, the Ascendancy has expanded, bringing order to chaos, structure to the void. We have tamed the gravity storms of the Keth Nebula. We have broken the warlords of the Outer Rim. And yet we hesitate before a patch of empty space because of ghost stories, because of dust and echoes." He turned his gaze slowly, deliberately toward Thrum. "The Archivist would have us believe that the Silent Sector is forbidden, that the primitive settlements we have detected on the third planet of the Yellow Star are not opportunities for annexation, but warnings. Speak, Archivist. Tell the High Council why we should fear dirt farmers who have barely mastered combustion." Thrum swallowed hard, his throat sac clicking nervously. He was a scholar, not a soldier, a creature of dust-filled libraries and ancient, crumbling data stacks, not of war rooms. But the truth he held was heavier than the fear of death. He stepped forward, his movements jittery, his voice thin but surprisingly steady. "High Exarch, Lords of the Fleet," Thrum began, projecting the image from his slate into the central hologram. Showed a grainy, distorted image recovered from a probe that had drifted too close to the sector centuries ago. It depicted not a warship, but a buoy, a simple geometric shape broadcasting a repeating signal in a language that predated the Ascendancy. "These are not ghost stories. They are translations of the precursor dialect, the root tongue from which our own high speech is derived. The warning is specific. It does not say keep out to protect themselves. It says keep out to protect us." A ripple of murmurs went through the crowd, a mix of mockery and unease. Thrum pressed on, desperate. "The myths of the Soulborn are found in the archives of every species we have conquered. The Oric call them the sleepers in the iron. The Krell call them the architects of sorrow. The data suggests that the primitives we see now are a facade, or perhaps a remnant of something that decided to lay down its arms. To disturb them is to invite a calamity that our history has no metric for." Valoris laughed, a harsh, barking sound that shattered the solemnity of the room. "Architects of sorrow, sleepers, you speak of poetry, Thrum, when we discuss logistics. We have scanned their world. They possess chemical rockets. They broadcast radio waves. They are a fractured species, warring amongst themselves over resources we would consider waste. They are weak." Valoris gestured to the grand map, zooming in on the small, unassuming yellow star. "And that system sits directly atop the richest deposit of hypermatter we have ever detected. With that resource, the Ascendancy could power its fleets for 10,000 years. Are we to starve our engine? Est because you are afraid of a myth? Are we to deny our destiny because of a warning written by dead gods?" The Exarch turned to the gathered admirals, his expression hardening into command. "The fleet launches within the cycle. We will enter the Silent Sector. We will secure the resource. And if these Soulborn object, we will show them the difference between a myth and a dreadnought." The cheers that erupted were deafening, a roar of imperial hunger that drowned out Thrum's frantic pleas. The archivist stood alone in the noise, clutching his slate, watching the hologram of the yellow star, and he felt a cold dread settle in his stomach, a certainty that they were not marching toward glory, but stepping off a cliff into an abyss that had been waiting patiently for eons. The journey to the silent sector was not instantaneous. It was a slow, majestic procession of power. The Ascendancy fleet was a sight to behold, a river of alloy and energy flowing through the veins of hyperspace. Huge cruisers, their hulls adorned with the intricate carvings of Zaltora history, flanked the massive dreadnoughts, vessels so large they possessed their own gravitational pull. To the soldiers and crew aboard these ships, the mission was a foregone conclusion. They were the masters of the galaxy, the apex predators of the stellar void. They spent the transit time sharpening their blades, running simulations of planetary bombardments, and joking about the primitive trophies they would claim. But in the quiet of his quarters aboard the flagship Sovereign's Will, Archivist Thrum could not sleep. He spent the cycles poring over the translations, cross-referencing the ancient texts with the sensor data streaming in from the forward scouts. The more he read, the more the discrepancies terrified him. The primitives on the planet, their population numbers didn't make sense. Their energy output was too low for a civilization of that size, yet their climate was stabilized with an unnatural precision. It was as if the planet itself was a stage, a curated exhibit. When the fleet finally dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system, the reality of the silent sector hit them. It was not empty. It was too quiet. Space usually hummed with background radiation with the cosmic noise of dying stars and birthing nebulas. But here, the sensors reported a flat, static stillness. It was as if the vacuum itself was holding its breath. Valoris stood on the bridge of the Sovereign's Will, staring out at the yellow star that burned steadily in the distance. "Report," he commanded, his voice echoing through the bridge. The sensor officer, a young and eager lieutenant, looked up from his console, confusion marring his features. "Exarch, we are detecting the planetary habitation, confirming primitive status. No orbital defenses, no energy shields, just scattered satellites and debris. It is exactly as the long-range scans predicted, a defenseless garden." Valoris smiled, a cruel twisting of his mandibles. "And the hypermatter?" The officer nodded enthusiastically. "Readings are off the scale, sir. It is emanating from the outer gas giant, but—" "Wait," the officer paused, tapping his screen. "There is a signal, audio only, wideband frequency. It is directed at us." "Put it on speakers," Valoris ordered, expecting a plea for mercy or a confused first contact greeting. The bridge fell silent as the static cleared, replaced by a voice. It was not a digitized alien screech, nor the guttural language of the Ascendancy. It was a voice speaking their own high tongue, but with an accent that sounded ancient, heavy, and incredibly tired. "This is the perimeter of the Sol Concordance. You are crossing a demarcation line established before your sun ignited. Turn back. There is nothing for you here but regret." The transmission cut. No threats, no screaming, just a statement of fact delivered with the boredom of a parent scolding a wayward child. Valoris bristled, his pride stung by the dismissal. "They speak our tongue? How?" Thrum stepped forward from the shadows of the bridge, his voice trembling. "They have been watching us, Exarch, for a long time. They know our language because they likely monitored our radio leakages for centuries. Please listen to the tone. That is not fear, that is patience." Valoris whirled on the archivist. "It is arrogance. They hide in the mud and command us to leave. We are the Ascendancy." He turned back to the tactical display. "Ignore the warning. Advance the fleet to the gas giant. Begin extraction procedures. If any vessel approaches, vaporize it." The armada moved forward, a wall of metal and guns pushing into the sanctity of the system. They bypassed the inhabited inner planet, treating it with the contempt one might show an anthill while walking to a picnic. The target was the gas giant, a swirling behemoth of orange and cream clouds, where the hypermatter readings were singing their siren song. As the massive E. Extraction ships began to unfurl their siphons, the bridge crew of the Sovereigns Will watched the sensors with a mix of boredom and anticipation. It was too easy. It was exactly what they wanted. And then the universe seemed to stutter. It wasn't a sound, for there is no sound in space, but the sensors registered a gravitational shear so violent it triggered the collision alarms on every ship in the fleet. Space, directly between the fleet and the gas giant, tore open. It didn't open like a hyperspace window, swirling with blue Cherenkov radiation. It simply ceased to be space and became a hole in reality, a vertical slit of absolute darkness that defied the starlight. From this tier, a shape emerged. It was not the jagged, gun-studded aesthetic of the Ascendancy, nor the organic curves of the Orit. It was a monolith, a slab of matte gray material, perfectly rectangular, vast beyond comprehension. It possessed no visible engines, no visible weapons ports, no bridge tower. It was a geometric impossibility, a tombstone the size of a moon, rotating slowly, silently against the backdrop of the gas giant. "What is that?" Valorous whispered, the first seed of genuine doubt taking root in his mind. The sensor officer was frantic, his hands flying across the controls. "Unknown material, it absorbs all scanner frequencies. I can't get a mass reading, but the gravitational displacement suggests it has the density of a neutron star. It shouldn't be possible for a structure that size to exist without collapsing." The object sat there, immobile, blocking the path to the hypermatter. The Ascendancy fleet, thousands of ships strong, looked like a swarm of insects buzzing before a steel wall. Then the voice returned. It bypassed the communications array entirely, resonating directly through the hull of the ship, vibrating the very air in the bridge. "Second warning. You are in violation of the Sanctuary edicts. Deactivate your weapons and withdraw hyperdrives. You will be escorted to the perimeter." Valoris's fear converted instantly into rage. He was the High Exarch. He did not take orders from a geometry lesson. "They jam our comms, they mock us," he roared. "All ships, target the center of that structure, fire at will, burn it from the sky." The order was given. The Ascendancy fleet unleashed hell. Thousands of plasma torpedoes, coherent ion beams, and mass driver rounds streaked across the void, a storm of destruction capable of cracking a planet's crust. The light of the barrage was blinding, turning the dark of space into a searing white day. Thrum shielded his eyes, watching the main view screen, waiting for the debris, waiting to see the alien vessel crumble. The barrage impacted. Fire blossomed. Energy discharged. For a full minute, the object was lost in a sphere of explosions. When the smoke of energy dissipation cleared, silence reclaimed the bridge. The slab was untouched, not a scratch, not a scorch mark. The energy had not been absorbed, it had been negated. The gray surface remained perfectly, terrifyingly dull. "Impossible," Valorous breathed. "That is impossible." The response from the slab was immediate. A single section of the gray wall shifted, sliding back to reveal a dark opening. No light came from it, just a sense of depth. From the opening, a small object launched. It was tiny compared to the slab, perhaps the size of an Ascendancy cruiser, but it bore the same design philosophy, sleek, featureless, terrifyingly simple. It moved with a speed that defied inertia, stopping instantly in the center of the Ascendancy formation. "Warning ignored," the voice said, sounding sadder now. "Protocol Omega initiated, disarmament commencing." The small human ship, for Thrum knew now with a sinking heart that this was the warship of the myths, did not fire lasers, it did not launch missiles, it emitted a pulse. It was a wave of distortion visible to the naked eye as a ripple in the starfield. The pulse passed through the front line of the Ascendancy destroyers. Instantly, their lights died. Their engines went cold, but it was worse than a power failure. The molecular bonds of their armor plating began to loosen. The ships didn't explode, they simply unraveled. Complex alloys separated into their base elements. Gun barrels turned to dust. Hulls softened like wax. The crews inside were left floating in emergency force fields that the pulse had seemingly spared, drifting in the void amidst the confetti of their dissolved warships. "They are unmaking us," the tactical officer screamed, his composure shattering. "They are rewriting the physics of the local space. Our fusion cores are inert. The strong nuclear force is being dampened." Valorous stared in horror. This was not war, this was pest control. "All ships retreat, jump, jump now." "We can't," the navigator wailed. "Hyperspace is locked down. The local gravity well has been stabilized. We are trapped." The human warship turned its attention to T. Sovereign's will. It didn't need to maneuver, it simply altered its vector without banking. It approached the flagship, looming large in the viewport. Thrum watched it come, and he felt a strange sense of calm. This was the judgment he had warned of. The myths spoke of the Soulborn not as conquerors, but as the pure. Pure in their logic, pure in their application of force. They did not kill out of anger, they removed threats. The Sovereign's will shuddered, not from an impact, but from a grapple. A tractor beam of immense power latched onto the flagship. Then the boarding sequence began. There were no cutting lasers, no explosive breaches. The airlock of the bridge simply opened. The override codes used were older than the Ascendancy itself. The atmosphere did not vent. A shimmering field kept the air in. Through the open airlock walked three figures. They were bipedal, encased in armor that looked like liquid mercury flowing and shifting with their movements. They carried no visible weapons. The central figure's helmet retracted, revealing a face of pale skin, tired eyes, and short, gray hair. It was a human. A male, by the looks of him, aging but possessing a vitality that radiated power. He looked at the frantic bridge crew, at the trembling Valorous, and finally at Thrum. "I am Commander Halloway of the Terra Guard," the human said. His voice was the same one from the transmission, calm, authoritative, weary. "You have fired upon a containment vessel of the Sol Concordance. You have attempted to breach a quarantined hypermatter singularity. You have proven yourselves a danger to the stability of this region." Valorous drew his ceremonial pistol, his hand shaking. You dissolved my fleet. You are monsters. We are the Zaltora. We rule the stars." Halloway looked at the pistol with mild interest, then flicked his finger. The weapon grew hot, glowing red, forcing Valorous to drop it with a shriek of pain. "You rule a sandbox," Halloway said gently. "A sandbox we allowed you to play in because you were quiet, but now you are throwing sand in the eyes of the adults." Thrum stepped forward, falling to his knees. "My lords," he said, using the highest honorific, "we did not know. I tried to tell them the myths, the warnings." Halloway's expression softened as he looked at the archivist. "We know, Archivist Thrum. We monitored your council session. Your objection is noted and is the primary reason your flagship was not disassembled like the others. We do not punish the wise for the sins of the arrogant." Valorous clutched his burned hand, his eyes wide with a mixture of pain and cognitive dissonance. "Who are you?" he hissed. "If you have this power, why do you live in the mud? Why do you hide on that primitive rock?" Halloway walked to the main viewport, looking out at the massive gray slab that still dominated the view. "We don't live on the planet," he said, gesturing to the world below. "Those are the descendants of those who chose to forget. They live simple lives, happy lives. We protect them, but the rest of us, the Sol Concordance," he pointed to the gray slab. "That isn't a station, it's a plug." The silence on the bridge was absolute. "A plug," Thrum whispered. "The universe is old," Halloway said, his voice taking on the cadence of a teacher explaining a difficult concept to a child. "Much older than your ascendancy, and it is porous. There are places where the fabric of reality is thin, places where things from outside try to get in. The hypermatter you detected, it's not a fuel source, it's leakage. It's the energy bleeding through from a dimension of pure chaos. If you had extracted it, if you had breached the containment, you would have opened a door that could never be closed. The resulting expansion would have consumed this galaxy in a matter of days." The human turned back to Valorous. "We are not hiding. We are working. We are the janitors of the Milky Way. We hold the doors shut. We reinforce the walls. We have spent 10,000 years standing guard in the dark so that children like you can play at Empire in the light." The revelation struck Thrum with the force of a physical blow. The humiliation of the ascendancy was total. They had marched in as conquerors, believing themselves the pinnacle of evolution, only to find that they were merely noisy children disturbing the work of the true masters. The warship that had terrified them was likely just a maintenance skiff, a utility vessel used to swat flies. Valorous slumped into his command chair, his spirit broken. The paradigm of his entire life had shattered. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice hollow. "Do you destroy us, enslave us?" Halloway shook his head. "We have no need for slaves, and destruction is a waste of entropy. No, you will return to your space. You will issue a decree that the silent sector is forever off-limits. You will tell your people that you encountered a natural phenomenon, a hazard of Navi. Gation, you will lie to save your pride, and we will allow it because we do not care about your politics. We care about the integrity of the seal." The human signaled to his companions and the liquid armor flowed back over his face. But before he turned to leave, he paused. "However," the synthesized voice spoke now, colder and more metallic. "The ascendancy has potential. You have drive. You have organization. We are tired. The watch is long, and our numbers are few." Halloway turned back, the face mask retracting once more to show his eyes that held the weight of eons. He looked directly at Thrum. "Archivist, you showed wisdom. You showed an ability to learn from the past. We need liaisons. We need eyes and ears in the galaxy that understand the stakes, not to rule, but to watch." Thrum's hearts pounded in his chest. "You wish for an alliance." "Not an alliance," Halloway corrected. "An apprenticeship. The leak in this system is stabilizing, but there are others. The void is pushing harder. The myths you read about, they are becoming active again because the threats are returning. We can handle the heavy lifting, the physics, the combat, but we cannot be everywhere. We need a species that can grow up, quickly. The human stepped closer to Thrum, placing a heavy hand on the alien's shoulder. The touch was warm, solid, undeniable. The warship proved the myths were true, yes, but the myths are incomplete. They forgot to mention why we fight. We don't fight to conquer. We fight to ensure there is a tomorrow. The Ascendancy ignored the warnings this time. If you ignore them again, there won't be a human warship to stop you. There will be something else, something that doesn't negotiate, something that feeds. Holloway pulled a small, crystalline data chip from his wrist gauntlet and pressed it into Thrum's hand. Coordinates: a meeting place in neutral space. One ship. No weapons. Send your scientists, your philosophers, leave your soldiers at home. If you want to know the truth of the universe, if you want to help us hold the door, meet us there. With that, the humans turned and walked back into the airlock. The energy field shimmered and vanished. The Sovereign's will was released from the tractor beam. The massive gray slab began to rotate, the sensors registering a massive energy buildup, not for a weapon, but for a transit. The reality tier opened again, and the slab, along with the warship, slid into the darkness and vanished, leaving the Ascendancy fleet broken, floating in the silent, empty dark. For a long time, no one spoke on the bridge. The hum of the backup power systems was the only sound. Valorous sat in his chair, staring at the empty screen, a king without a crown. He looked old, defeated, his onyx carapace seemingly duller. He turned his eyes to Thrum. There was no anger left in him, only a terrifying clarity. "Archivist," Valorous rasped. What do we tell the council?" Thrum looked down at the crystal in his hand. It pulsed with a soft, warm light, a heartbeat of data. He looked at the debris of the escort ships, the dust of their arrogance floating in the void. He realized then that the Ascendancy was dead. The empire of conquest was over. A new era had begun, one not of expansion, but of survival. The humans had humbled them, yes, but they had also offered them a hand. They had offered them a purpose greater than vanity. "We tell them the truth, Exarch," Thrum said, his voice gaining a strength he had never possessed before. He walked to the center of the bridge, standing where the hologram of the sector had been. "We tell them that we are not the masters of the galaxy. We tell them that we are children playing in the dark." He clenched the crystal tight. "And we tell them that the Guardians have invited us to join the Watch." The journey back to the Ascendancy capital was somber. The fleet limped home, a parade of the wounded. But inside the Sovereign's will, the atmosphere had shifted. The fear was gone, replaced by a profound, studious intensity. Thrum spent the return trip decoding the initial layers of the data crystal. It was a primer. It contained astrophysics equations that were centuries ahead of Zaltora science. It contained biological data on the hunger, the extra-dimensional entities the humans held back. It was a terrifying grimoire of cosmic horrors, but it was also a manual for defense. When they finally stood once more in the grand obsidian hall, the silence was different. It was not the silence of oppression, but of anticipation. Valorous stood at the podium, his arm in a sling, his demeanor changed. He did not boast. He did not shout. He simply played the recording of the encounter. He showed the council the gray slab. He showed them the dissolution of the destroyers. He played Holloway's speech. The reaction was not the outrage Valorous had expected. It was a stunned, horrified awe. The admirals, men and women of war, looked at the power of the Sol Sea Concordance and realized the futility of their own ambitions. The trade princes saw the scale of the threat and realized their wealth meant nothing if reality itself was consumed. Thrum stepped forward then. He was no longer the trembling archivist, he was the messenger. "They offered us a choice," he told the gathered thousands. "We can continue to pretend we are kings, and eventually we will open a door we cannot close, or we can accept that we are small and learn to be strong. The Solborn are not our enemies, they are the shield, and they have asked us to be the rivets that hold it together." A debate raged for days. There were those who wanted revenge, who wanted to steal the technology, who refused to believe the threat. But the images of the dissolving ships were too potent. The reality of the human power was too absolute. In the end, logic prevailed. The Zaltora prided themselves on order, and the humans represented a higher order. 6 months later, a single Zaltora vessel arrived at the coordinates Holloway had given. It was not a warship. It was a science vessel, painted white, stripped of all armaments. Thrum stood on the bridge, flanked by the best minds of the Ascendancy. They waited in the deep void, away from any star. When the human ship arrived, it was not the terrifying monolith, but a smaller, elegant diplomatic cruiser. It docked with a gentle thud. The airlock opened, and Commander Holloway stepped out, this time wearing a simple uniform, his hand extended. He smiled, a genuine, tired expression of relief. You came, Holloway said. We listened, Thrum replied, taking the human's hand. The first time a Zaltora had touched an alien with anything other than violence in 1,000 years. We are ready to learn. Holloway nodded, gesturing them to follow him back onto the human ship. Good, because the warnings are getting louder, and this time we're going to need all the help we can get. As they walked through the corridors of the human ship, Thrum saw the crew, humans, yes, but also others. Species thought extinct, species from the far side of the galactic core, all working together, all focused on screens displaying shifting, chaotic patterns of energy that made Thrum's eyes ache. He realized that the Sol Concordance was not just humans. It was a coalition of survivors. The humans were just the vanguard, the warriors who stood at the gate. They reached a central observation deck, a dome of transparent aluminum looking out into the true void between galaxies. Holloway pointed into the blackness. Do you see it? Thrum squinted. At first, he saw nothing. Then, with the aid of the ship's sensors overlaid on the glass, he saw it. A shadow, a bruise on the universe. A vast, amorphous shape that blocked out the light of the distant galaxies. It was moving. It was hungry. That is what approaches, Holloway whispered. That is why we stay pure. That is why we are harsh. We have been holding that back for 50,000 years. Thrum looked at the shadow, then at the human. He felt a terror deeper than anything he had ever known, but mixed with it was a burning resolve. The myths were true. The warnings were real, but they were no longer alone. Then let us begin, Thrum said, his voice steady. Teach us, the ascendancy is dead, the watch begins. And in the silence of the deep void, against the backdrop of the encroaching dark, a new alliance was forged, not of conquerors, but of guardians standing shoulder to shoulder, ready to hold the line against the night. The warship had proved the myths were truth, but the peace that followed proved that even in the face of annihilation, unity was the strongest weapon of all.